Hello, we're back at it. So everything is dried up, and I have a slight confession to make. In the time that I've been showing you all how to handle and make this guy, I have in addition made this guy and this guy because I believe that there are different levels of involvement for different folks. Some people just want to make their pumpkin and be done. Some people want to make it a little bit more sculpty, coolly weird, and some people want to go all out. And I want this video to cater to all three of those personages. But for right now, we're going to start off with the person who has finished all the steps that we've heretofore got to and is done. So this happy little fellow right here is going to be our done pumpkin. I've done only what I showed you guys to do at about 3 hours and 50 minutes in. This guy probably would have taken a little less time because his face is much less complicated. But I'm going to assume that somebody just went through, did all that stuff, and is now ready to paint. So let's start bringing this guy alive. Now, I used to like my pumpkins dark, but I have really come to appreciate the beauty of just natural pumpkin-y orange. It's very bright and visible. So I'm going to paint this guy that way. You can paint your pumpkin however you want. If you want a very dark and menacing paint coloring, then I would recommend starting with a black base coat. But if you want a visible bright orange one, then you're probably going to start with a white base coat. Because this is my first pumpkin video, I am not going to use any kind of special stuff. I'm going to go super like 50-cent acrylic stuff. This here is some apple barrel 2-ounce white. Really, really simple stuff to get and have. I've just got a larger container of it because I'm insane. So these two things are the exact same material. The paint that you use is pretty much irrelevant so long as it gets you the color. If you want to do crazy waterproofing on these guys, you can use some Drywall masonry sealant, but I'm going to assume that we have no access and no inclination of expensive stuff. We just want the cheap stuff. So I went out and I got a 2-ounce bottle of whatever white for 50 cents, $1, or whatever your local currency happens to be at a local craft store. So I've got this white. It doesn't have to be apple barrel. It can be folk art, whatever. Generic white acrylic paint. And all we're going to do is give this guy a base coat inside and outside with our paint. So I've got a guard done here, pretty much all the way around, maybe about 3/4 of the way up the stem, because I just wanted a spot where I could keep moving without getting my hands covered in paint. Make sure you give them plenty of time to dry, even though it seems like they're dry pretty quick. Let them go for a good bit, because unless you're planning on doing extra waterproofing, this paint is going to be 9/10 of the waterproofing that your pumpkin is going to get. When I get ready to handle them next time, after this dries up, I'm just going to go around the bottom and around the inside. And it's all going to be white. I find that white tends to be best for the inside just because it will reflect the color of whatever you put in there. If you put in colored lights that are going blue, green, red, you will always get a perfect return on your internal color. And if you decide to put a LED candle inside, again, it'll give you a perfect return on the color. Whereas if you paint the inside something else, if you paint the inside blue, green, red, yellow, whatever, then you put something different inside, you're going to get a different color return coming from it. So I do recommend outside white, inside white, but it's your pumpkin, and unleash your magic. Everything's dried up on the outside. I'm going to do the last bit of the top and then the inside and around the bottom. It can be helpful with a smaller pumpkin around the bottom. If you've got a big brush and you're trying to go in there, you might end up hitting it. So if you can take a brush and either break off a bit, or if you've got something, this one snapped on me a while ago, but it is kind of heavy to have a nice short brush so you can get in here without a problem, do all your work, and not have that end hitting it. So if you can get a hafted brush, more power to you to make the inside a little bit simpler. I'm gonna get to work. when doing the inside, it's not necessarily hugely important to hit the back of the face. That side will be obscured anyway. The main thing you want is somebody being unable to peek inside and see the newspaper in the back. And so long as that's vaguely covered, you're absolutely fine. That's this little guy all set. I'm going to give him some drying time, and then we're going to start really bringing him to life. So our little fella here is all whited up, and now we are going to do some darkening in these grooves to help give them a little bit more 3D pop. To do that, we're going to be dry brushing some brown paint into the bottom of the grooves. You do not have to use brown paint. You can use wood stain, you can use dark shoe polish. So long as you've got something that darkens, that is all you need. But the main trick of this is to, rather than just leave a line of paint straight down here, we're going to do something called dry brushing, which gives us a little bit of dark, and then it kind of fades out back to white as it hits the end of the curve. So to start off, I'm going to show you what I don't need. So here is some brown paint. This is the same brown paint that you can get in these little things for about 50 cents a piece. I just have more of it because I make a hell of a lot more pumpkins. So here's how I don't want to do it. And that's just to get paint on my brush and paint a line. Bear in mind, you can do this if the dry brushing method seems kind of and you don't get it and you don't want to care about it. This will look okay. But to dry brush, what we're going to do is get some paint on our brush, have a surface piece of paper, piece of newspaper. I'm just using a paper plate. And then we're going to get most of that paint back off. And I'll know it's back off and my paintbrush really isn't going very crazy anymore. And then I'm going to start painting into a section here, and where I apply heavily, it'll be dark, but towards the edges, it'll be kind of light. So here's the difference between these two tones. See here, I just have straight dark. Here I have kind of a varying dark light. The reason for this is that when we go over it with the orange, it's just going to add a shadow to the back of our deep grooves. And we want a shadow rather than a full blast of dark. So let's just add some paint to the brush, get most of that paint back off, and swaggle it into the grooves. You can also go up on the edges a little bit to add a little bit more fade if you want. So I've done that right there. If you want to spread out the effect and get a more gradual orange to brown darkening, but you don't have to. This is based on how much you want to do. And what you're getting here is kind of a poor man's airbrush effect. So I've got fade to the outside, darker to the center. I'm just going to go through and do all the grooves on the pumpkin this way. See you at the end. I should also mention, you're going to have the deep grooves and you're going to have the shallow grooves. The deeper grooves, you can add a little bit more paint on because they are going to be really, really, really slurpy and hungry for paint. But the shallow grooves, you probably want to have your brush be a little bit drier than normal. If you're having any trouble differentiating as you go around your pumpkin, just start with the deep grooves, practice on the painting technique from there, and then go back and do your stuff with the shallow grooves. So be aware. Another thing I should probably mention is the fact the reason that we're doing this in this order is that we're going to cover this with the orange and it's easier to cover a mistake with something else than to putting up something that might be a mistake on the top. So it's just easier to recover if anybody has a goober up in this stage first. That's why I do this before I do the orange. Another thing that's really nice about dry brushing is that it tends to dry very, very fast. The next thing I'm going to do, because I plan on putting a green stem on this guy, you can make your stems brown, green, or obviously whatever color. But if you want this same sort of darker areas recessed effect, I'm just going to go and dry brush my brown into these dark areas in between my my stem rift outs as well. So I'm going to be going right in there. And another spot that I'm going to hit to differentiate my stem from my pumpkin a little bit is just a bit around the bottom of my stem bulbs here. I'm going to kind of try to outline them and give myself some color differentiation zone from the pumpkin itself. So that's an option that you've got as well if you want to go that way. I'm going to rock and roll with this guy is I'm going to paint the inside edges of around his mouth and teeth yellow, because when you cut into a pumpkin, you've got the orange on the outside, but then the inside pulp is pretty much almost entirely yellow in color. So I'm going to add that next just before I go around and orange the snot out of him. Part of the reason for doing this now rather than after the orange is the fact that the orange is going to cover up just about everything. And it's easier to cover up a mistake with orange than to try to wash off a yellow mistake on top of everything else. Same with the brown. I am going to give this guy just a few minutes to dry, maybe 10, 12 in front of a fan. And then when I make sure that he is where I want him to be, I'm going to come back and splash him with some orange.